I remember the moment humanity entered our records. Not with fire, not with conquest, but with noise. Long before their vessels ever clawed their way into interstellar space, Earth screamed into the void. Bursts of electromagnetic chaos flooded our listening arrays. Discordant music, overlapping voices, fragmented mathematics, emotional pleas encoded into primitive signals. To us, it sounded like a species arguing with itself in the dark. We laughed. In the galactic archives, Earth was filed under transient civilizations, volatile biosphere, unstable political blocks, frequent self-inflicted extinction risks. A species too young, too divided, too emotionally driven to survive the pressures of a galactic age. I signed off on that assessment myself. When their first ship finally appeared on our long-range sensors, it confirmed every bias we held. It was slow, asymmetrical, unarmed. Its hull bore scars not from battle, but from atmospheric escape and mechanical failure. Their propulsion signatures fluctuated wildly, as if the vessel itself were uncertain whether it deserved to exist in vacuum. We intercepted their communications easily, open channels, unencrypted, filled with formal greetings and cautious optimism. They called themselves humans. Their diplomats spoke of cooperation, shared knowledge, peaceful integration. Even as their representatives addressed the council, our intelligence feeds showed their homeworld burning with conflict, border wars, economic collapses, environmental damage layered atop old wounds that never truly healed. Hope, we decided, was their primary survival mechanism. The council treated them gently, condescendingly, like juveniles wandering into a battlefield wearing ceremonial armor. We imposed guidelines, restrictions. I remember believing we were being merciful. What none of us understood, what I now struggle to put into words, was that Earth was not peaceful because it was weak. Earth was peaceful because it was exhausted. This was a species that had nearly erased itself more times than our historians could comfortably catalog. Nuclear firestorms narrowly avoided, ecological collapse postponed by desperate innovation. Plagues survived through stubborn persistence rather than elegance. Humans did not know peace as an abstract ideal. They knew it as a fragile pause between catastrophes. They were tired of war, tired of extinction, tired of standing on the edge of oblivion and deciding again and again to step back. So when our negotiations stalled, when trade disputes hardened into sanctions and sanctions became blockades, humanity did not rage, they did not threaten retaliation, they did not beg. They went silent. At first, we celebrated this as success. Their broadcasts faded, diplomatic envoys withdrew, cargo traffic from Earth dwindled to nothing. The Council declared the containment effective. But silence is not absence. It is compression.
Human infrastructure, once scattered and inefficient, began to reorganize. Civilian manufacturing hubs shifted priorities. Energy grids were rerouted. Research collectives merged into centralized development nodes. Our analysts noticed irregularities, statistical anomalies that did not yet form a pattern. We dismissed them. After all, how dangerous could a species be that argued endlessly over philosophy while their oceans rose? Then the projections began to fail. Human industrial output spiked then, not gradually, but explosively. Prototype weapons appeared in months instead of decades. Shipyards multiplied in orbit around Earth's moon and hidden in asteroid shadows. Their engineers abandoned our safety doctrines entirely, burning through designs, crews, and resources with terrifying indifference to loss. Where we valued preservation, humans valued momentum. Where we feared failure, they treated it as tuition. I recall the exact moment my confidence fractured. A junior analyst, barely out of larval phase, presented revised models showing humanity's military potential exceeding containment thresholds within a single cycle. The chamber laughed. A statistical error, they said. Emotional bias. I should have listened. By the time the Council reconvened, human vessels had already crossed deployment thresholds we believed impossible for them. Their silence broke not with words, but with motion. Fleets appeared where no fleets should exist. Supply chains rerouted faster than our monitoring systems could adapt. Still, we told ourselves this was defensive. Still, we told ourselves we were in control. But deep in the data, beneath the projections and dismissals, a truth had begun to surface, one I was too proud to voice aloud. Humanity had stopped asking for permission. And that was when history quietly turned against us. Because this was the moment we will one day teach as the beginning of the end. The moment we mistook exhaustion for weakness. The moment we underestimated a species forged by catastrophe and still standing. And as Earth's silence deepened, something vast and deliberate began to move behind it, something we would not recognize until it was already too late. The embargo was never intended to be a weapon. That is the lie we told ourselves. Officially, it was a corrective measure, a calibrated application of economic pressure designed to teach restraint. Human access to trade lanes was severed. Their colonies were cut off from galactic supply networks. Essential materials vanished from their markets overnight. Energy quotas were throttled. Navigation permissions revoked. To the Council, this was mercy. To any rational species, it would have been a death sentence. Our historical models were clear. Prolonged isolation fractures alliances, ignites civil wars, collapses weak governments. Species turn inward, then turn on each other. Empires fall not to invasion, but to hunger. So we waited. At first, the data pleased us.
Human colonies began to starve. Energy consumption plummeted. Civilian unrest spiked across Earth's political blocks. Their information networks flooded with panic, blame, recrimination. I remember thinking, there it is, the breaking point. But then something changed. Human communications shifted tone, less noise, more coordination. Emergency councils formed not along ideological lines, but practical ones. Borders blurred. Rival factions shared resources with minimal negotiation. Their language changed too, less rhetoric, more logistics. They began to ration. Not chaotically, not violently, with grim collective discipline. Food distribution stabilized, power grids were rebalanced. Entire cities went dark voluntarily so others could function. On worlds already starving, civilians dismantled their own infrastructure to keep evacuation corridors operational. This alone was unsettling. Then the factories changed. Civilian manufacturing hubs, once dedicated to luxury goods, entertainment, non-essential consumer output, were repurposed within weeks. Assembly lines retooled themselves with breathtaking speed. Agricultural processors became munitions plants. Cargo haulers were stripped down and reinforced into crude warships. They recycled everything. Derelict satellites, decommissioned stations, wreckage from failed launches, even civilian housing modules were reforged into hull plating. Where we prized pristine materials, humans embraced imperfection. Scars became structure, damage became design. Our analysts reported famine, then resilience, then something far worse. Innovation. Human engineers ignored nearly every safety doctrine we considered sacred. They overclocked reactors beyond tolerances. They tested weapons live, in atmosphere, with crews still aboard. Prototypes exploded, crews died, designs failed catastrophically. And then they tried again. Failure, to humans, was not an endpoint. It was data. They iterated with terrifying speed, months of progress compressed into weeks, weeks into days. Their designs were ugly, asymmetrical, and brutally effective. They favored redundancy over elegance, survivability over aesthetics. Where our ships were monuments, theirs were tools. I remember the first time a human counterstrike appeared on our tactical displays. It was small, laughably so. A single fleet, patched together from mismatched hulls and outdated weapon systems, emerged near a contested system we believed fully secured. Our patrols outnumbered them 6-1. Our commanders prepared to erase them in a single engagement. Instead, the humans did not advance. They held position. They anchored themselves between our forces and the evacuation corridors behind them. Civilian transports, human and non-human alike, began slipping past, fleeing the system under the cover of that fragile line. The humans transmitted no demands, no threats. They knew the numbers. They knew the odds. They fought anyway. The engagement lasted far longer than projections allowed. Human ships absorbed damage that should have destroyed them, systems failing one by one while crews rerouted power manually, sealing hull breaches with their own bodies if necessary. When weapons overheated, they rammed. When shields failed, they boarded. One by one their vessels fell, but the line held. By the time our fleet finally broke through, the evacuation was complete. The system was empty. The humans were gone, dead, drifting, or burning in vacuum. Our victory reports were muted. In council chambers across the galaxy,
Something cold settled into the silence. Because that battle should not have mattered. Strategically, it changed nothing. Emotionally, it changed everything. Humanity had demonstrated a concept we had never truly faced, a species willing to lose, deliberately, knowingly, if the loss bought time for others to live. Our analysts began updating doctrines. Engagement predictions adjusted upward, casualty tolerance recalculated. Still, the numbers did not make sense. Human losses mounted at unsustainable rates. And yet, they did not slow. Each defeat fed the next design. Each destroyed ship reappeared as a better one. Each fallen crew became a training case, their mistakes codified into doctrine within days. Among the council, arrogance began to rot into unease. Humans were not the strongest species we had faced, not the most technologically advanced, not the most numerous, but they possessed something no model could quantify: endurance without illusion. They did not believe they were invincible. They simply refused to accept extinction. I remember overhearing the whispers in the strategic galleries, voices lowered, appendages tight with tension. "They're bleeding themselves dry," one admiral said. "Yes," another replied. Losses that would have shattered empires only hardened them. Entire fleets destroyed became rallying points, memorialized not as tragedies, but as lessons. Human media did not hide the dead. They broadcast them, faces, names, last messages, turning grief into resolve. Every death became doctrine. Every sacrifice became a promise. For the first time in my long service, I heard a question spoken aloud that no one could answer. Not shouted, whispered. What if they don't stop? And in that moment, watching humanity burn itself brighter rather than fade, I felt something I had never associated with a lesser species before. Not contempt, not pity, fear. Because a civilization that will not break under starvation, isolation, and loss is a civilization that will not know when to surrender. And we were only just beginning to test how far they could be pushed. Then, Earth vanished. Not in fire, not in surrender, in silence. One cycle, their signals still cluttered our listening arrays. Distress calls, fragmented data bursts, the low hum of civilian traffic clinging to existence. The next, nothing. No broadcasts, no military transmissions, no diplomatic channels.
Even their uncontrolled leakage into the void, those chaotic, emotional echoes that had once defined humanity, were gone. Our probes crept closer to their system, cautious but curious. What they returned confused us. Static, debris fields drifting where orbital infrastructure had once orbited, cold wreckage tumbling through space, stripped of identifying signatures. Automated defense platforms lay dormant, power cores burned out as if deliberately scuttled. Earth itself was quiet. The Council declared the human threat neutralized within a single session. Analysts cited collapse, starvation finally overwhelming resilience, internal conflict finishing what embargoes began. The conclusion was neat, comfortable. Celebrations followed. Orbital halls filled with light and sound, fleets were reassigned, emergency budgets dissolved. The human problem was archived, another volatile species that burned brightly and briefly before extinguishing itself. I did not celebrate, because silence, in predator species, is never peace. It is focus. I had studied enough emergent civilizations to recognize the pattern. Prey screams, predators watch, and when predators go quiet, it is because they are calculating distance, timing, angles of approach. I filed my concerns. They were politely ignored. Years passed. Borders stabilized, trade routes reopened, worlds once threatened by human resistance rebuilt under the assumption that the danger had passed. Even I began to wonder if my instincts had betrayed me, if humanity, for all its stubborn brilliance, had finally reached its limit. Then the first report arrived. A deep space monitoring station on the fringe of mapped territory went dark. No distress call, no battle telemetry, just absence. Investigators assumed malfunction until a patrol was dispatched. The patrol never returned. Soon after, a mining outpost vanished, then a relay hub, then an entire supply convoy, ships intact, crews gone, cargo untouched. The attacks followed no known pattern. No hyperspace wakes, no established corridors. Our navigators could not even agree on where the enemy had come from. And then, without warning, they appeared.
Human vessels emerged from dark space itself, not from hyperspace lanes, not from folded corridors, but from vectors we believed unnavigable, regions our physics deemed unstable, lethal, impossible. They had rewritten navigation through trial, error, and sacrifice. Later analysis would confirm it. Entire human test fleets lost to miscalculations, crews knowingly venturing into zones where spacetime twisted violently, mapping survivable paths with their own deaths. Their ships bore the evidence. Scarred hulls, patchwork armor, asymmetrical designs that look less engineered than survived. They were not beautiful. They were not refined. They were stubborn, built not to inspire awe, but to keep functioning after it should have been impossible. Their tactics shattered our engagement doctrines.
They ignored range superiority, charging directly into kill zones. They rammed capital ships when weapons failed. They boarded through hull breaches we thought too small to matter, flooding our corridors with infantry who fought room to room with terrifying calm. When shields held, humans detonated themselves against them. Not randomly, precisely. Shield harmonics we believed unbreakable buckled under repeated suicidal impacts tuned by previous losses. Every destroyed human ship returned as data. Every death sharpened the next assault. They did not fear attrition. They used it. We tried to regroup, to consolidate defenses, to apply overwhelming force. It did not matter. Human strikes were surgical. They did not glass planets. They did not annihilate populations. Instead, they decapitated. Supply chains collapsed overnight. Command centers vanished without warning. Admirals awoke to find their fleets blind, deaf, and stranded. World after world fell, not to conquest, but to paralysis. Governments collapsed under the sudden absence of logistics. Star systems surrendered not because they were attacked, but because they could no longer function. Humanity did not seek annihilation. They sought leverage, and they wielded it with frightening restraint. Only then did we begin to understand what Earth's silence had truly meant. Humanity had not died. It had shed itself. Old doctrines abandoned, old politics burned away. During those silent years, humans had reorganized into something colder, leaner, unified not by hope, but by memory. Every blockade, every starvation report, every dismissive council decree preserved and studied. Earth had become a forge, and what emerged from it was no longer a species reacting to pressure. It was a species applying it. The realization spread through the council like a delayed shockwave. Earth was no longer defending itself. It was demonstrating consequences, teaching us, system by system, how fragile our empires truly were when stripped of comfort and assumption. As reports continued to arrive, more systems lost, more fleets crippled, I felt a truth settle into my core, heavy and undeniable. We had mistaken silence for victory. In reality, it had been a warning. And now, as humanity stepped fully into the light once more, it was clear that the lesson was only beginning. Because the species we had once tried to humble had learned how to hunt. The Galactic Council had not invoked emergency convergence protocols in 8 centuries, not for supernova cascades, not for interspecies wars that erased entire bloodlines, not even for the collapse of the third spiral arm. Yet now, the chamber's ancient seals disengaged with a sound like a grave opening. Representatives arrived in disorder, robes unfastened, ceremonial markings abandoned, neural translators lagging behind panicked speech. Species that once measured time in millennia now counted losses in hours.
Tactical projections flickered across the central holodice, each one worse than the last. Supply networks failing, command nexuses neutralized, entire fleets rendered inert without decisive battles. Humanity had not overwhelmed us, it had unraveled us. Panic infected the chamber like a contagion. Delegates who had once dismissed Earth as a footnote now whispered ceasefire proposals to empty air, desperate to be the first to surrender quietly. I watched proud civilizations fracture into self-preservation instincts before my eyes. And then, the human ambassadors arrived. No escort fleets, no dramatic entrance, no display of force. A single delegation, modest in number, their vessels docking openly, broadcasting credentials instead of threats. Their representatives entered the chamber wearing simple attire, functional, unadorned, scarred in ways that spoke of survival rather than status. They did not look victorious. They looked tired. The chamber fell into a silence more profound than any humanity had ever produced in its absence. The lead envoy stepped forward, a human female, her posture straight but unyielding, eyes scanning the chamber not with hatred, but assessment, as if she were cataloging a system that had failed inspection. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Behind her, the holodice activated, not with accusations, but with records. Trade agreements, blockade authorizations, civilian casualty reports, colony starvation indices, broken treaties signed in our own languages, bearing our own seals. Every life written off as collateral, presented without embellishment, without commentary. It was not a plea. It was an audit. "We came to you in peace," the envoy said at last, her voice calm, controlled, almost gentle. "We asked for cooperation, for guidance." Her gaze hardened, not with anger, but with certainty. "We had diligently overpromised you." The words landed heavier than any threat, because they were true. What horrified us was not the evidence. It was what wasn't there. No footage of cities annihilated by human fleets, no planetary sterilizations, no extinction-level reprisals. The humans had possessed the means. Our own analysts confirmed it. Their revised propulsion, their attrition-tuned weaponry, their willingness to sacrifice. Humanity could have erased dozens of worlds in retaliation. They had chosen not to. Instead, they dismantled. They stripped fleets of command coherence without destroying them. They exposed corruption networks that had thrived beneath council oversight for centuries. They leaked evidence of internal exploitation, economic predation, political hypocrisy, allowing our own populations to turn on their leaders. Human warfare was not conquest, it was correction. Governments were left standing, but naked. Worlds remained intact, but humiliated. Empires survived, but permanently changed. The realization rippled through the chamber as species after species understood the implication. This was not vengeance, this was restraint.
And restraint, wielded by a species capable of annihilation, was far more terrifying than rage. I felt something shift inside me then, a reframing so violent it bordered on pain. Humans did not fight hardest when they hated you. They fought hardest when they believed you were capable of better and chose not to be. Their war was not about dominance, it was about accountability. The envoy continued, her tone unchanging. "You will lift the embargoes, all of them. You will reopen trade lanes and restore access to shared infrastructure." Murmurs erupted, outrage, fear, pride wounded beyond measure. She raised one hand. "We are not asking," she said. The hollow dice shifted again. Live tactical overlays appeared, updated, current, undeniable. Human fleets positioned not at our capitals, but at logistical choke points we had never publicly acknowledged. Their reach was precise, surgical. I realized then the most devastating truth of all. Humanity had learned our systems better than we understood ourselves. They had studied us in silence, learned how we moved resources, how we responded to pressure, how our politics bent under stress. They knew where to strike to cause collapse without bloodshed. They knew where not to strike. The Council's authority, once absolute, felt suddenly ceremonial. We were no longer arbiters of galactic order. We were defendants. As the session dragged on, ceasefire motions passed unanimously, not out of unity, but inevitability. Species that once scoffed at Earth now competed to demonstrate compliance. The human ambassadors watched without triumph, only vigilance. As the session recessed, I caught the envoy's gaze, brief, assessing, unreadable. In that moment, I understood something that will haunt my species for generations. Humanity was not finished. This was not the end of their war. It was the beginning of their terms. And as the Council scrambled to adjust to a reality it no longer controlled, a single thought echoed through my mind with chilling clarity. We had mistaken mercy for weakness, and now we would spend the rest of our history learning the difference. The final battle above Earth was meant to cleanse our shame. That was how the Council framed it, redemption through decisiveness. A coalition fleet assembled from a dozen major powers, vast enough to blot out stars, precise enough to erase a single world. No sanctions, no audits, no restraint. Just overwhelming force delivered swiftly so history could be corrected. We believed that if Earth burned, the nightmare would end. Our armada translated into the Sol system with flawless coordination. Capital ships formed layered spearheads, planet killer platforms armed and aligned. Tactical confidence flooded command channels. This was the kind of battle our doctrines were built for. One target, one strike, one conclusion. Earth waited. Not in silence this time. Human traffic flooded the battle space.
Civilian transports surged outward from the planet, not away from danger, but into it. They threaded themselves through combat corridors, running supplies, fuel, and replacement crews to defensive platforms already under fire. I remember a junior strategist asking why civilians were allowed so close to the front. The answer chilled the chamber. Human logistics did not collapse under pressure. It expanded. Damaged warships did not retreat. They stayed in formation, engines failing, hulls breached, piloted by crews who could not longer stand but refused to disengage. Medical vessels doubled as command relays. Cargo haulers were packed with munitions instead of food, crews knowing they would not return. Earth's surface burned. Orbital bombardments tore through atmosphere, igniting continents in firestorms visible from space. Defense grids flared and failed, then flared again as ground crews rerouted power manually, cities going dark so planetary shields could hold for seconds longer. Seconds mattered. Every delay cost lives. Every delay saved others. Humanity did not fight like a military. It fought like a species cornered by extinction and unwilling to accept it. Our coalition fleet advanced steadily, methodically, shedding confidence with every unexpected resistance. Human weaponry lacked refinement, but it struck with relentless persistence. Missiles were dumb but numerous. Fighters were fragile but fearless. Boarding craft slammed into hulls we believed secure, disgorging soldiers who fought not to win, but to delay. Delay became doctrine. Delay became hope. I watched tactical feeds as entire human squadrons burned themselves out holding firing lines long enough for evacuation ways to clear orbit. Pilots stayed conscious through lethal G-forces, blacking out and waking again, hands still locked to controls. When comms failed, they used light signals. When power failed, they rammed. The coalition's advantage began to erode, not in firepower, but in cohesion. Our formations assumed retreat where there was none. They assumed fear. They assumed rational self-preservation. They did not understand what they were facing. Because Earth was not defending territory, it was defending continuity. Then the human flagship appeared on our central displays. A massive vessel, scarred, overbuilt, clearly older than most of the fleet around it. Its signature flickered erratically, reactors strained beyond tolerance. It should not have been operational. And yet, it moved to the forefront. Our commanders saw an opportunity. Concentrated fire converged. Beam weapons carved into its hull. Kinetic strikes shattered armor plates kilometers wide. Fires raged across its surface. The flagship did not retreat. Its engines flared brighter. Damage reports flooded human channels, hull integrity collapsing, core containment failing, evacuation protocols ignored, no escape pods launched. For a brief, terrible moment, I believed the humans had finally. Then, the flagship changed course. It accelerated directly into the densest cluster of coalition capital ships, those coordinating the primary bombardment. Defensive fire intensified, tearing the vessel apart piece by piece, but it did not slow. Human transmissions burst across all frequencies. Not orders, not prayers. Goodbyes. Messages to families, to cities already burning, to a world that might not survive the hour. And then, the flagship detonated. Not a reactor breach, a deliberate overload. The explosion tore through space with controlled fury, tuned with the same brutal precision humans had honed through years of loss. 3 coalition capital ships vanished instantly. 2 more were crippled beyond recovery. The shockwave shattered formation coherence across the entire spearhead. Our command structure collapsed in seconds. Fire control networks dissynchronized, targeting solutions failed, defensive overlaps vanished. The armada, designed for clean annihilation, became chaos. Human horses surged, not in triumph, in relief. They pressed the advantage only long enough to secure orbital control. They did not pursue fleeing ships. They did not exploit the collapse to annihilate what remained of the coalition fleet. Instead,
something unthinkable happened. A human ceasefire request appeared across command channels. Clear, open, unambiguous. The council representatives aboard the fleet hesitated, convinced it was deception. Tactical officers screamed to continue the assault, to finish it while Earth still burned. But the humans did not attack. They held position. Their message repeated. Ceasefire requested. Engagement objectives achieved. Confusion rippled through our forces. Strategic models failed entirely. No doctrine accounted for a species that would halt a decisive victory voluntarily. As negotiations began, hurried, disbelieving, I understood the truth. Humanity had not intended to win that battle by force alone. They had intended to win by demonstration. They had shown us what extinction resistance looked like, what unity under annihilation meant, what a species could endure, and still chose restraint. Earth had burned. Humanity had bled. And yet, they stood, not because they were unbreakable, but because breaking had never stopped them before. The ceasefire was accepted, not out of mercy, out of recognition. The final battle above Earth would not be remembered as our redemption. It would be remembered as our failure to understand a simple, devastating fact. You cannot terrify a species that has already stared into its own extinction, and decided to fight anyway. As the last weapons powered down, and the fires on Earth slowly dimmed, I realized that history had crossed an irreversible threshold. Humanity's last stand had not been their end. It had been their ascent. And nothing in the galaxy would ever look at Earth the same way again. We waited for the occupation fleets. They never came.
In the cycles following the ceasefire, every strategic model predicted the same outcome: human expansion, territorial claims, military governors installed over shattered systems, retribution disguised as order. It was the natural sequence of victory as we understood it. Humanity ignored it. Instead of annexation notices, repair convoys arrived. Trade beacons long dark flickered back to life under human-coded protocols. Navigation corridors reopened, not selectively, but universally. Even worlds that had fired upon Earth found their supply chains restored. At first, we assumed deception. Then the data became undeniable. Humans were rebuilding what they had broken, and what we had neglected. They shared propulsion refinements openly, without exclusivity clauses. Medical technologies born of battlefield necessity were distributed freely to civilian populations. Defensive platforms were installed at vulnerable systems, crewed jointly, often protecting species that had once voted unanimously for Earth's isolation. When asked why, human representatives answered with the same sentence, every time. No demands for tribute, no declarations of supremacy, no monuments erected to their victory. Earth did not become a throne. It became a reference point. Merchants began marking routes by distance from Sol. Political treaties cited post-Earth standards when defining civilian protections. Young species studied human crisis response models as required doctrine. Earth was no longer feared as a conqueror. It was respected as a survivor. What unsettled us most was how quickly humanity relinquished leverage. Choke points they had so carefully seized were returned to neutral oversight. Intelligence networks were dismantled or folded into transparent regulatory bodies. Even their military presence shrank, not vanished, but repositioned, defensive rather than looming. This restraint confused us more than their war ever had. In council chambers, we rewrote doctrine at a frantic pace. Attrition models were revised, ethical frameworks expanded to include concepts we had once dismissed as emotional inefficiencies, morale, narrative cohesion, civilian will. We were forced to admit an uncomfortable truth. Our definition of power had been incomplete. Power was not merely the ability to destroy. It was the ability to choose not to, after proving that you could. Earth's image changed across the galaxy. Not banners, not statues, stories. Of civilians who ran supplies through orbital firestorms. Of engineers who died testing unsafe designs so others could live. Of a flagship that chose annihilation not to win, but to end the war. Earth became a reminder etched into collective memory. Survival breeds a strength ambition never will. And with that reminder came a shift I did not expect. The change was not external. It was internal. Among my own species and others, I heard the question phrased differently now. What can we do? That question haunted policy discussions.
It crept into academic circles. It unsettled admirals more than any tactical defeat, because the answer was implicit and terrifying. If humanity ever decided restraint was no longer warranted, there would be no council vote in time to matter. I returned once more to Earth's transmissions, not the old chaotic noise, but their current broadcasts, reconstruction efforts, cultural exchanges, memorials not glorifying war, but cataloging cost. Humans remembered everything. That too was new to us. Most victorious species rewrite history to soften it. Humans preserved theirs intact. Failures, atrocities, near extinctions, studied openly, taught relentlessly. So it would never be forgotten. So it would never be repeated. As trade resumed and alliances reformed, I realized the galaxy had not entered an age of human dominance. It had entered an age of human reference. Every decision now carried an unspoken comparison. Would this action create another Earth? Would this pressure forge another species that learned the same lessons? And beneath those questions lay one deeper still, not spoken aloud, not yet. If humanity, patient, restrained, rebuilding, was the result of being pushed to the edge, what kind of civilization would emerge if they were ever pushed beyond it? That thought lingered as the stars slowly returned to normal traffic patterns, as worlds healed, as the Council pretended equilibrium had been restored. We told ourselves the crisis had passed, but deep down, every species that had witnessed Earth's rise understood the truth. The war had changed us, and the next time the galaxy faced extinction-level pressure, we would not be watching humans to see what they do. We would be watching ourselves, to see whether we were worthy of their restraint. This is my final record. I transmit it not as a warning born of fear, nor as an apology disguised as wisdom, but as a correction to the lies we told ourselves when it still mattered. Let it be known, entered permanently into the Galactic Archive, that humanity was never special because it was the strongest. We have faced stronger, species that bent stars to their will and crushed worlds without effort. They were not the fastest. We have seen minds that processed centuries in moments, fleets that crossed galaxies before humans mastered orbit. They were not the most intelligent. Our histories are filled with civilizations that solved the universe like an equation. Humans were special because they refused to surrender. Not to nature, not to war, not to despair. Earth was a world that should have died 1,000 times over. Its biosphere was violent, its tectonics unstable, its species prone to self-destruction. By every metric we respected, humanity should have erased itself long before it reached us. And yet, it endured. When famine came, they rationed instead of rioting. When isolation came, they adapted instead of pleading.
When extinction loomed, they fought, not because they believed they would win, but because surrender was unacceptable. We tried to break them. We starved their colonies and called it policy. We isolated their world and called it protection. We dismissed their resilience as coincidence and their suffering as inevitability. In doing so, we did not humble humanity. We reminded them who they were. A species born in catastrophe, raised by near misses, educated by failure. A people whose myths were not about paradise, but survival. Whose heroes were not conquerors, but those who stood their ground long enough for others to escape. When Earth went silent, we celebrated. When Earth returned, we learned. Humanity did not come back as executioners. They came back as auditors. They showed us our hypocrisies, our complacencies, the fragile assumptions beneath our empires. They did not annihilate us when they could have. They did not rule us when we were vulnerable. They restrained themselves. That is the detail future historians must not overlook. Restraint is not weakness. It is choice. And choice, backed by the proven capacity for annihilation, is the most terrifying form of power the galaxy has ever encountered. If any future civilization reviews this archive, if some young species stands where humanity once stood, catalogued as transient, dismissed as noisy, dangerous, or insignificant, heed this warning carved from our collective failure. Never corner a species forged by extinction and hope in equal measure. Never mistake exhaustion for surrender. Never assume restraint is permanent. Never believe that survival instincts fade with technology.
Earth does not seek your destruction. I state this with certainty, earned through observation and regret. Humans do not crave domination. They do not hunger for empire. They remember too well what unchecked power costs. But if you force their hand, if you starve them, if you isolate them, if you teach them that peace is punished and restraint is exploited, they will adapt. They will endure. And they will win. Not because they are invincible, but because they are willing to pay a price others will not. This transmission is not meant to glorify humanity. It is meant to contextualize them. They are a mirror held up to the galaxy's arrogance, a reminder that survival, when paired with memory, becomes something far more dangerous than ambition. I end this record with the hope that it will never be needed again. But hope, as humans taught us, is not a strategy. So let this stand as doctrine, etched into the silence between stars. You shouldn't have messed with Earth. End transmission.